Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm Georgia Tech welcome to Katharine Kelley.
Can you all hear me? Thank you so much, Adicula, for that very kind introduction, and thank you all for having me here. I'm very honored to be part of the Impact series, and although I'm admittedly a Tar Heel, as you heard, I'm also very proud to say that my grandfather was a graduate of Georgia Tech and my uncle, and as I thought about it, I really credit very much of my being an Atlantan to my grandfather and Georgia Tech specifically. He came here and was a graduate of the School of Architecture in 1926, moved here from Tennessee, and long story short, that brought all the family from other states, and here we are today. So we definitely grew up singing all the fight songs and going to the football games, and really appreciate my Georgia Tech roots in many ways. Where I have sought to make an impact is through the arena of real estate development, and specifically I am passionate about creating lovable, walkable, sustainable communities that will make this city and very philosophically this world a better place. And so, in conjunction with that, and also as an entrepreneur, I think I've been fascinated with how to combine the pursuit of product innovation with what is otherwise a very old line, capital-intensive industry that is not necessarily known for its speed of change. So that is one of the themes I wanted to talk about today as part of my overall impact thoughts. Just in general, let me get set up with you. When I think about creating value through real estate, I sort of break it down simplistically in a couple of the major food groups for real estate. And again, while I appreciate that not all of you are real estate developers, nor, heaven forbid, would ever want to be a real estate developer, we do very much share a common city, and I'm hoping that today I can share and offer some of my own ideas for how we can all make this a place and make our communities, wherever they are, places that we're very proud and excited to be part of. So, in general, on the real estate front, you have your financial engineering approach, your commoditization approach, and creative placemaking. And of course, the lines get blurred and there are elements of each and all of the above, but in general, financial engineering often involves this sort of very sharp toolkit of financial instruments, cap rate spreads and timing and tax strategies and a number of different instruments that can be used to add value, but not necessarily a huge and heavy focus on the underlying product itself. On the commoditization front, you can see an example here. I kind of think about it as sort of the Walmart of real estate development, where the focus is on a very streamlined, efficient, repetitive product where you are able to harvest wonderful cost efficiencies and really take advantage of that repetition. And then on the creative placemaking front, you're really focused, that strategy is focused on creating value through this notion of uniqueness or product differentiation, where the emphasis might be more on top line revenues while also trying to balance and make sure you're smart about the costs, but it all has to be balanced out. And of course, the third strategy is obviously the one where I've chosen to focus my efforts. On the placemaking front, obviously with any of these strategies, there are pros and cons and benefits and so forth, but placemaking is a very complicated, complex, time-consuming strategy and process, but with that comes, by definition, high barriers to entry because the brain damage is not necessarily something that everyone wants to take on. By the same token, when you're able, or when you engage in that level of complexity and sort of customization, there are high expectations on the part of the customer and a heavy level of engagement. And as you work through that, though, and balance it out, you're able to achieve a wonderful loyalness or stickiness of the customer that goes along with that heavy level involvement. And finally, as I touched on a minute ago, one of the big challenges is managing costs. Because when you have a lot of repeated customization, by definition, you're not streamlining and efficient and so forth. So, really managing those costs is critical. But ideally, if you've done your job right, you're able to outpace the market on the top line and really make the financial equation work out. So I thought I would go through a little bit of a how-to guide, which are some of the strategies that we've used over time that have worked well for us in really thinking through, what are the elements of creative placemaking. And it starts really almost counterintuitively just by listening. And we come to a place or an opportunity or a site and start by thinking, okay, what is this place? What does it want to be? What's its history? What is it surrounded by? What is it connected to physically? What is it connected to socially? Who is the community that's around it? What are their values? We want our communities to be real and authentic, and one part of that is really looking at the history of that place, and whether it's reusing some old building, or even in one case with one project, it had beautiful historic trees that we were able to take forward. But any of that historic fabric that we're able to incorporate just gives that much more richness and uniqueness that contributes to the authenticity of it being a real place. Another element of creative placemaking is challenging the rules. And it's really important if you're going to continue to innovate and sort of create this uniqueness that you think critically about what are otherwise conventional rules. So just to give an example, in a prior chapter I worked with Post Properties and helped put together, this is Post Parkside at 10th and Piedmont. And Post at the time was moving in town from a more of a suburban history. And we had these formulas. You have to do at least 200 units, and you need a pool and a tennis court, sort of a formula. And we found ourselves with a 2-acre site thinking, okay, we can't fit all this, we can't do this. And what we really were able to drill down to was, at the end of the day, it's about amenities. And that's what all of this pool, tennis court, that's what's the core. And so we were able to rethink and say, okay, maybe we can do a misting station instead of a pool. Or here you can see in the foreground the entrance to Piedmont Park, which was literally right next to the project. You don't need your own tennis court. You can, Piedmont Park has a tennis court, and so forth and so on. And so a lot of it is just getting to the essence of what the rule was intended to do, and then rethinking another way to do it. It's really important with any of these strategies to align with the right kind of capital that supports the strategy. And for creative placemaking, one of the best capital partners that we found is patient equity capital. And across multiple examples, what we found is that by definition, a lot of times if you're working on creating new and different and unique places, you need someone who's willing to take risks, and also a partner who is willing to make an investment that may not make the quickest buck the first day, the first minute, but will build a project that'll stand the test of time and ultimately outpace the market. It's sort of the tortoise and the hare concept that you're probably familiar with. But that capital and the sharing of values and strategies is so important to aligning interests as you're going into any of these projects. I'm a huge believer that great design is a major differentiator in any of these creative placemaking opportunities. I'm sure you've all studied cases in companies like Nike where great design is just integral to their strategy. And I believe the same with our real estate developments. It is worth every penny spending the extra money to team up with a great design group. And I use the term design loosely and holistically because the design is not just about the architecture of the building, but it's also about a holistic approach that gets to the interiors of the building, to the furniture, to the branding, to the signage, to the streetscape that's outside the building. It all has to be thoughtful and integrated and consistently well designed. Otherwise, there's not an integrity to the message that you're trying to send to the market. As you can imagine, with this highly customized project or product, it's all the more important to have the right fit with the customer. And really understanding your customer is just a fundamental element of this strategy and really any kind of development. There are, as you know, huge forces at work, between the millennials and the baby boomers. You have the two largest generational demographics in U.S. history, and they're having a tremendous impact on real estate development. We happen to think that there's a nice alignment with those demographic trends because we find those two groups wanting a lot of the same things, where rather than having all the old people sent off to a retirement farm out in the suburbs or put in a tower away from everybody else, they want to be part of the community just as anybody else does. They want to go to the same restaurants that they've loved. They want to be near their kids and their grandkids. They all want to be connected to the Beltline or places where they can walk instead of having to drive everywhere they go. So we see a lot of these demographic trends reinforcing the kind of creative placemaking urban infill strategy that is really important to our work. But again, regardless, whether you're building a commodity product or whatever, you have to understand the customer, because it does no good to build a project if you don't have anybody to live there or populate the offices. I think another really important element is creating a sense of community, and that's not just about the buildings, but it's really about the people. And just as with the design topic that I mentioned a minute ago, it's important to take a holistic approach to community. And in creating community, there's so many elements and paths to doing so, whether it's through social media or the arrangement of the buildings or the proportion or the design. Having many mayors. This is a woman here named Thea who, from the very beginning of this project, became the one who knew everyone and sort of glued the people of the community together. And I'm sure you all know, whether it's in school or wherever you are, there are these mini mayor types, and they're wonderful people that really bring community to their surroundings. Even food can be a huge source of community and a way to gather people. And we used to joke that for our company, food was to us as a real estate developer as golf is to a lot of other real estate development firms. It was our way, our gathering point. And finally, it's critical with any of these projects. I mentioned earlier, they're very complicated, very time consuming, and you have to obsess over the details. And in fact, the details are really what I think is the most fun part. It's the essence of what brings something to life. And all of those details really add up to create that uniqueness. This is Robert Davis, who was the founder of Seaside in Florida. And it's widely known that his wife was the person who really glued together the town center in Seaside, if you've ever had a chance to visit there. She was the one that worked meticulously with all of those individual retailers and helped them with their merchandising and their signage and their storefronts, and really just fretted group by group to bring together what ultimately became the heart of the community and really helped transform everything around it. I thought I would take some of these general concepts and just sort of walk through a case study about a project that we did to help illustrate maybe more specifically some of the things I'm talking about. This is a project called Mixon, which is located in North Charleston, South Carolina. And it's a great example of creative placemaking, not just of building a new project, but in this case, really turning around a very difficult situation. What we started with basically was a failed project in a bad location when we were brought into the process. Mixon was basically 18 homes, which you'll see a tiny little cluster here over about a 40-acre site of undeveloped property. This was a former public housing project, and you can see the sort of the ghosts of the streets that were there from the old public housing project, and all the buildings had been demolished. And then on the right, you can get a sense of how it was basically this sort of surreal place with 18 homes out in a field. And it was just sort of a ghost town. Here's another view. It was sort of an eerie, an eerie place at the time. And I think it had the additional challenge of being North Charleston, not Charleston. So, you know, not the historic district that we all think of when we think of Charleston, but what I would graciously call an outer borough of Charleston, up near the airport. And it was just in the middle of nowhere, and people didn't have a reason to go there per se. What that did was to really put an emphasis on our strategy in bringing people there and finding reasons to go there because they wouldn't otherwise be going to this location. So what did we do? And you know, starting out, and just as I said earlier, listening and thinking about the place, we started just thinking about what is this community and connecting with Charleston itself. And you know, Charleston, from our perspective, was a city that was all about art and preservation and creativity and great food. And so we set about with this notion of building Mixon around the themes of food and great design and community. And since there was nothing there, the first thing we did was to build community before we built the community. And what I mean by that, as you can see here, was literally out in the middle of that green field that you saw. We built a pole barn, a very simple structure up in the corner here, that became a place to host events. We had food truck rodeos and dog festivals and makers markets and craft fairs, and just started creating reasons for people in that surrounding community to come there, and just started learning, helping them learn where this place was. And Thea, by the way, the person I mentioned, she was in this specific project, the one who, as all these people came from North Charleston and Park Circle and all these other areas around us, would start remembering their names and remember that they came to the dog festival last week and now they're back to, you know, come buy a cutting board from the crafts person there. One of the other things we did very early on was to build a 7,000 square foot private bath and racket club with a wonderful pool and dining and racket sports. And this was intended along the same lines to be a way for people from all over the Charleston area to be members and to have a reason to come here, but also, of course, serving the people on site in the Mixon project itself. So again, another way to sort of retrain traffic patterns and foot patterns to bring people here and start to create a there. The club became a great place to host events and weddings and bar mitzvahs and different activities. And as part of the club, we built a restaurant called Bosico that was open to the public, using the same kitchen basically, which you can see here in this photo. And we were very excited. We worked very hard on PR, and Southern Living wrote up Bosico as one of their favorite bars that they cover, and was helping really get the word out about, bringing people to the site to come to the restaurant. In addition to the club, there was just this general theme of creating a physical heart to the project. And I showed you all those 18 homes that were built in the field. Well, most of them weren't sold. And so we rented out whatever wasn't sold. We put in, as you can see in the upper left-hand there, retail spaces in the ground floors of some of the units where there otherwise would have been a garage. And here, for example, Mix and Market was a wonderful gourmet coffee shop with great sandwiches that would cater to the military base nearby. I mentioned about Bosico and the restaurant. Here's a flower shop in the base of another one of the units. We had a hair salon. Nest was a little furniture store, and we would host farmers markets in temporary structures around this area. And again, the goal was to create this physical heart where you had momentum and energy from this common set of amenities. So, it doesn't do any good to have all these amenities if there's no one there to use them. And it was very important as the market started to pick back up again that we launched an initial development phase of 268 multifamily units called the Flats at Mixon. And this was not only something that made sense from a market perspective as an investment, but it was also a great way to bring people to the site, going to the restaurant, going to the coffee shop, using the parks and so forth, and really starting to generate some momentum and energy, because we had a lot of land to sell and a lot of single family homes and so forth that needed to feel an energy moving and a momentum on the site to really inspire a builder to want to buy land. I mentioned design earlier, and Mixon, everything about Mixon had this consistent theme of great design. The original homes had their own very Charlestonian design that you probably saw. The club was very modern, sleek design. And then with the units, the multifamily units, we really worked through every aspect of the interiors, the leasing office, the branding. You can see the unit interiors and the courtyards. We even had these wonderful common screen porches. Here's the outside view of the screen porches that were community gathering places in the apartments with our own, branded ping pong table. I mean, we were going nuts on this design. But really every detail, as I said earlier, it was so important to have that holistic approach down to the smallest of details to really communicate consistently this notion of quality and brand integrity. The other dimension of that that's really important was taking that great design out to the street. So it wasn't just a community that sort of fed on itself, but we worked hard on the surrounding streets and in the internal streets to completely redo the streetscapes to be much more walkable and have what we call natural forms of traffic calming with bulb outs and medians and street trees, and engaging the buildings to connect to the streets with stairs and stoops and steps that were places that people could sit and see their neighbor or read the paper or what have you. And then the next chapter has become, and it has worked, thankfully, interest from the builder community as the single family market picked up, catalyzing those land sales. Not every new home will be modern, but it was important to us to show a range of styles and designs so it wasn't all just sort of Disney World, all one look, sort of all master coordinated. So what started 2 years ago as this sort of 40-acre undeveloped site basically now looks like this, and ultimately is leading to a master plan as we continue to build out the project that has 500 homes. It's a $150 million development with a mix of multifamily, single-family, townhouse, retail, the amenities that we looked at. It has really been a wonderful opportunity to generate that momentum, and I'm happy to share that the apartments, for example, exceeded the original underwriting by 50% in their rents and have outpaced the whole submarket. Same thing with the single-family homes. So we're finding with these early indicators that the strategy's working, and the energy and the momentum are in fact coming through. I think just in general, and the last area I wanted to, just to kind of rethread it, for Mixon, we have the sort of building of community, the focus on great design throughout the project, building the physical heart with amenities and common places for people to gather, and then bringing people to the site through these vertical components like the multifamily development to create the energy and activity. And that was, in this particular case, sort of the series of steps that we took to really sort of jumpstart this project, and hopefully gives you some examples of literally how we did that. So going forward, where do we go with all this and what's going on with Atlanta? It's interesting. We're finding in the market that the customer is demanding more and more, and the customer wants all of that wonderful uniqueness and customization, but they want all the low costs. They want it all, more for less. And that in turn is, really putting continued pressure on the development community to find a way to bring all that together. And I won't claim that we have all the answers, but it literally just sort of takes a project by project, very meticulous approach, using every tool in the toolkit to get there. And by the same token, companies really want their real estate to be an extension of their brand, because that helps them attract the kinds of employees and creative workers that they want to have in their companies. And people, individuals, want the places that they live to be an extension of their own personal brand and who they are and what they care about and what they love. And so, in general, it's really important for the real estate development world to reflect what's going on in the market. And as you all know, we're very much in the middle of this innovation economy. And the innovation economy is all about, the blurring of lines. And so when it gets back to real estate, is this office space or is this light manufacturing? We find office building lobbies that are starting to look like coffee shops or hotel lobbies, and there's this just sort of general blurring of lines among and between the uses that I find fascinating, and you see popping up all over the market. But by the same token, we have to, in the development world, we have to be flexible and nimble and adaptable to change, just as the innovation economy is with all of its rapid prototyping. And that's not always the easiest fit for, as what I said before, is this sort of old line, capital intensive, slow moving industry that's all of its infrastructure is set up to move in years and decades, as opposed to the nanoseconds of the innovation economy. So it's a very interesting time for the development community to respond to what's going on with the realities of the market. And for Atlanta in general, I've never seen such an exciting time to be in the city. The urbanism is alive. It gives all of us energy. It's an incredibly dynamic city that's just getting better and better and richer and richer. And that in turn, as I'm sure you're seeing, is a magnet bringing so many people to this city. So many of you came here from other places, excited by the energy that's Atlanta. And again, this is happening in so many other communities as well. But I do worry a little bit, in some ways, about a certain sameness that I'm starting to see with sort of the development theme going on right now with all of this capital coming in. And what my perspective is that we have an opportunity in Atlanta to create a city of places, and great places, and not just projects. And that's going to take a lot of collaboration between public and private, institutional and entrepreneurial, pulling from our history and focusing on the customer and all, so many of the themes that I've talked about today. And, you all and I, we all have a part in shaping that city in the choices that we make, whether it's, how we spend our time or how we spend our money or even what we choose to do with our life's work. And I guess in general, I would urge all of us to be very thoughtful and very deliberate about the choices that we make and in making great choices so that we can shape the kind of city and the kind of communities and neighborhoods that we all will be proud of. But I think most important of all, it's because those cities and communities have the ability to bring out the best in people. And it's all about people at the end of the day. So I will stop there. Happy to answer any questions and appreciate your being here today. There's one in the back there.
What do you see as, just hold up, sorry, I'll get to you. I
Okay.
appreciate that. I appreciate that.
I just wanted to start with getting an update about Ponce City Markets and how that redevelopment is going and how it got through the real estate slump in
Sure.
the city, how that affected it.
That's a great question. And just for clarity, I had the good fortune of working with Jamestown for a number of years and overseeing the development team that led that project. I spun off our Green Street company that was sort of the in-house development team back in the fall. So I do still, of course, stay in touch with my colleagues. And so what I'll share is sort of through them. Ponce City Market opened in the fall. The first phases were the residential with multifamily flats, move-ins kind of occurring month to month, and that's all been going really well. The office space opened up with Athena Health and Cartalytics and MailChimp, a number of the tenants that you might have seen in the press. The retail will be opening in phases. So this spring, for example, there's a series of food hall tenants that will open, and some of the sort of the first wave of that public food hall that will really be the heart and soul and gathering place for the public to come enjoy the project. And then there'll be another wave in the fall of the sort of the balance of the retail. It was interesting with Ponce, we started that project in the bottom of the market. It was a crazy leap of faith to buy a 2 million square foot empty building in the middle of, just sort of covered up with barbed wire and fenced in. And we found that the office space was the first to take off and ended up leasing about 75% of what was about 500,000 square feet in just 1 year. So it just sort of shot out at the gates, and then the residential right behind it and the retail. So we're deliberately just sort of rolling the phases as the market supports delivering those phases to the market. But the project did not have a sort of cut the ribbon and everybody runs through the mall grand opening. It's been more of a sort of organic rolling opening. So that's how it's sort of stepping through the phases.
Hey, I was just wondering, how do you guys make the decision to take on a project like Ponce City Market or like the Mixon case study that you shared, where there's like you said, it's a giant leap of faith. How do you guys? What's your process for deciding to jump in?
It's a great question. So just as a quick bit of history, Green Street Properties was a company that had its origins with the Glenwood Park development in Grant Park, East Atlanta area, if you may be familiar with that. Green Street was acquired by Jamestown, private equity firm, in 2008. And Jamestown had this whole portfolio of broken deals that were development deals that they had done with 25 or so developers all over the Southeast, and then the market just slammed the brakes on. And so Jamestown needed an in-house development team to go methodically through this $1.2 billion portfolio of projects. There are about 25 of them. And in each case, reposition, recapitalize, restart, So we had a lot of mix-ins to sort of test, how do we do this? And so it's a little bit of an unusual answer to your question in that we as a team sort of inherited all of these deals, and everything from raw land to a 90% complete condo high-rise in Brooklyn that had just stopped and run out of money and was full of liens. And really just sort of had to think creatively and holistically about how to attack each case by case. So going forward, as I mentioned, spinning Green Street off now that that portfolio is off in steady footing, it's much more starting with a clean slate about a fresh opportunity that, is in a place that we just choose, as opposed to sort of starting with that portfolio, if that makes sense.
What do you think is the greatest challenge to the current infill projects that are coming up inside the city of Atlanta?
I think the biggest, well, there are a lot of challenges. I think what I'm seeing is that land prices continue to go up and up and up. And, as sellers see the market recover and see projects built, they want to get the same thing for their land as the person down the street just got. And so with those higher land prices, there's a lot of pressure to build a lot of density. And I think it's important to be able to absorb all that product. And so sometimes you sort of get in this spiral of having to build enough to support the land price or justify the land price you paid, but it may or may not be enough, or it may not be the right amount of product that the market really can support and absorb. So I worry a little bit about all of this land driving this sort of capacity question.
Hi, is it on? Okay. You talked about how you were worried about Atlanta having a lot of sameness when it comes to development. And I was at another panel discussion that talked about how Atlanta's gotten to the point where they can leverage opportunities. So when developers come in, because so many people want to build here, they can kind of customize it where they can make sure that the development is influencing the community. So how would you recommend developers coming in and working with the community where that uniqueness shows with the development? So it's not all the sameness, but it's a representation of the people that live there.
Mm-hmm. I don't have a silver bullet answer, maybe just some ideas. It's interesting from the development side, it's amazing how much influence the community has through the zoning process. And Atlanta is built, as many of you know, on this NPU, Neighborhood Planning Unit, process where, adjoining neighborhoods and you sort of go on up to broader groups affected, but they get so involved in commenting on the look and feel of a project. It's pretty interesting, and I've been a part of a number of projects where a lot of it was very prescribed. You have to have X facade square footage of windows, or I think through zoning and through even the community or the planning department approval in the city of Atlanta, they have a lot of influence. And so for those developers who may need a little bit more of a nudge in that area, I think there is an opportunity for the community and for the city to have an imprint. And that's why I think, my appeal to everyone is that you have more of a voice than through different channels where you can have that communication if you live here or even in other cities, of course. Mm-hmm.
Catherine.
Hi.
All right, so as we're looking forward into the next, say, 3 to 5 years, I have a two-part question. So the first is, which markets and communities and neighborhoods are you looking to target within those next few years in Atlanta? And the second part is, what are the sort of defining characteristics of those neighborhoods that you look for when you're starting a new project?
Great. Well, going forward, our particular focus has actually gone into a strategy that we call urban acupuncture, where we feel that by projects as small as 1 or 2 acres even, you can go into a wonderful historic neighborhood, put in what I think of as sort of micro mixed use, but have this transformative impact on everything around it. And we're not necessarily focused on high-rise, Peachtree Spine, for example. We're focused on neighborhoods like Ponce Highlands and Inman Park and Old Fourth Ward, even on the west side, areas where there's sort of medium density, 2 to 5 stories, very walkable, an existing mix of uses so that we can have mixed use, but we don't have to build it all ourselves. We can go in with residential and street retail, but then maybe we're next to the Beltline or we're next to an existing office or single-family neighborhood. So it's important that our target neighborhoods have a fine-grained mix of uses already, but we want to come in at that sort of main intersection of the neighborhood and put in a great little gathering place that brings it all together. Oh.
You already gave us a few examples of projects you've done in Atlanta, but are there any others that you could give us some more information about, maybe future or current or the past?
Just in terms of some examples maybe, okay, so I mentioned Glenwood Park, which was a wonderful opportunity. We were teamed up at the time with Charles Brewer, who was the founder of MindSpring, who was a great example of that patient equity capital, and started that project in 2001. It was a 28-acre site, $120 million project, but we were able to, it was very early for sustainability, so we were able to incubate a lot of sustainability technologies and experiment and sort of do some out-of-the-box testing a product because we were all equity funded, and Charles was a wonderful entrepreneur with that sort of value set. So that project has just recently sort of sold its final phases, but was a great opportunity for sort of walkability and sustainability. Going back in my Post Properties chapter, I oversaw the team that built the Post Riverside project. That was interesting. That was in the mid-90s, and we brought Andres Dwani and a planning firm called DPZ to Atlanta, which was this whole notion of new urbanism was a brand new thing. And so we were trying there some new planning concepts that were very much against the grain of the sort of standard suburban code, which was what Atlanta still had from the 60s. So we had to really sort of struggle with that and change street dimensions and architecture. And so, each one has been its own different set of experimenting and trying to innovate, but push the envelope on the existing codes that were in place. And that takes definitely a lot of patience. But thankfully, over time, I think with some finished product to point to, people, we've had the chance to build up trust, so when we go talk to the city, they know that that experiment is probably a good one to make. And so, anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
Hi, Catherine.
Oh.
Hi. You've talked a lot about sort of the portfolios that you inherited, and I was curious about Brooklyn and that project and if there were any unique lessons learned there, and also just if you've done other work in New York that you can share.
Gosh, Brooklyn, that was a high-rise condominium project called B at Skirmahorn, and it was just a buffet of challenges and opportunities, everything from flooding to construction liens to permitting challenges to repositioning and remarketing what was a failed project because it literally had just stopped, 90% complete, just stopped. We were able to restart it and clean it up legally and restart the construction, finish the units. We sold them all. It ended up, thankfully, being the highest or the best-selling condominium project in New York in 2010. And I think in terms of lessons learned, we just had to be very thorough because there were so many different issues. We just had to literally, it's like a tangle. You just had to go one by one and pick each one apart and very methodically track everything and chase it down, and there were no shortcuts. Jamestown, our prior owner, is headquartered here in Atlanta but has an office in New York. So Jamestown has all sorts of projects in New York that are properties like Chelsea Market that are owned, existing assets, but in terms of sort of ground up development, we didn't do any other work there besides the Skirmahorn project.
How long do you think it's going to take for the entire Mixon master plan to be built?
It's a great question. I think at this point it's driven largely by the pace of absorption of the single-family homes. I would guess another 5 years, realistically, just because it's North Charleston and, there's only so much product that submarket can absorb. Glenwood Park, just as another data point, took 13 years from start to finish, but it went through 2 downturns in the market. So, who's to say with a healthy upswing, maybe Mixon can go faster. But, those master developments, they just take a long time. There's a lot there to absorb, sort of back to the question a little bit earlier. I think it's important to be realistic about how fast the market can absorb a project, and it's only going to go as fast as it'll go.
Sustainability. I have a question that what factors do you keep in mind when you're planning a development? For example, if you're planning away from the center of the city, most of the people have to come into the city for the jobs. And the traffic issues are already getting problematic in US. So how do you foresee that? Because if more developments are being made just outside the city or in the surroundings of the city, whereas like there are a lot of high-rise buildings, abandoned buildings in the downtown, which could be converted into a small community.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you factor in all those traffic problems and other sustainability issues?
Well, going forward, our focus is really urban infill. So we wouldn't, we're not pursuing greenfield locations like, out from the city. And, I guess our philosophy is that the most inherently sustainable thing you can do is to reuse existing infrastructure. The city and its taxpayers have built all the sewers and all the roads and all the transit systems and all the, physical and soft infrastructure to support people. And if you can go in and leverage that, that's inherently sustainable. Just as, New York is one of the, quote, greenest cities in the world, which is very counterintuitive, but it's just incredibly efficient because it's walkable and connected. So that at a very high level is our philosophy about sustainability, because the first thing you can do to make a sustainable choice is to pick a location that's efficient from that infrastructure perspective. And then you get into the sticks and bricks and the water efficient, all the details, but you got to start with getting the right location.
I have one more last question. That a couple questions had touched on how long the Mixon development is going to take, and that you had talked about how you need to be patient. Just the question of the students who may want to get into, are interested in real estate as a profession, what kind of characteristics and traits do you think have made you successful in your role, and what do you think that they should bring to the industry, both the challenges that or what has made people successful in the past, but also the challenges that the industry is facing now for tomorrow?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I guess the way I describe a real estate career or profession is that you have to be the consummate generalist. You have to know about this incredible breadth of topics, from politics to finance to property management to sales to design, construction, engineer. I mean, it's just everything. And then, maybe it's only a few inches deep, but you've got to know enough to bring together and lead a team that each of whose members are expert in those different topics. And yet, the other challenge is that at any one moment, you have to go down into the weeds. So, we go and have to match the keys with the numbers on the mailboxes. I mean, literally little details, all the way up to high-level strategy of, market positioning and customer perception, So it's this sort of broad horizontal and deep vertical, and you have to, it's just a really multi-dimensional career. In terms of getting into it, there's no one perfect way. I find a lot of times people will come in through one of the vertical areas like construction or through design or finance. I happen to think it's really important, no matter which channel you come through, to really understand and be grounded in the financial, because it's so critical to being able to be profitable, because no one will ever imitate you or create a better place by more of these projects occurring if you're not financially successful. So I think whether through graduate school or undergraduate or wherever you learn it through your training as an analyst, to really be sharp with the numbers is a really important tool to have in the toolkit. But otherwise, there's just so many different channels you can come in and then ultimately sort of have that broader exposure. And a lot of it is just learning by doing, which is how I had to do it.
Thank you very much for coming to Georgia Tech,
Thank you.
Katharine. We
Thanks
appreciate
very
your
much.
time.